Hi, everyone, and welcome to a special live edition of At Katie Couric. Very exciting to be live here. You know, since 2006, Twitter has been keeping us informed about what our friends are doing right now, 140 characters at a time. It's home to more than 50 million messages a day, everything from what someone had for breakfast to news feeds from journalists all around the world. Biz Stone is the co-founder of Twitter, and he's with us fresh from the Chirp, isn't that cute, Chirp conference that was held last week in San Francisco. And before we start, I'd like to thank the sponsor of our web show, Dove. Hey, Biz, how are you?
Katie, I'm very well. Thank you so much for inviting me today.
Well, thanks for being here. Really, it's a treat for us to be able to do this. And of course, we got a lot of tweets with questions for you, Biz. So I thought it was only appropriate that we start with one. And Celte B tweeted a logical first question. Why only 140 characters? How did you guys come up with that number?
We came up with that number because we were inspired initially by texting, mobile texting, you know, SMS. And there's an international limit on SMS of 160 characters. So we wanted to leave room for the author of the tweet and give them attribution. So we decided, let's standardize on 140 and leave room in front of the tweet for who wrote it.
Did you guys sort of experiment for a while, or did you just, you know, did it take a long time to kind of come up with that?
It didn't take too long. We knew from the get-go that what we really wanted to do was we wanted the messages to remain readable in their entirety, no matter what sort of device they were sent to, whether that was a mobile phone over rudimentary SMS or a smartphone that can run an internet browser or an internet browser. So we wanted the messages, no matter where they were created or where they were being sent, to be able to be read in their entirety. And so it became a very simple decision then to keep the messages very short.
You know, you mentioned texting, and we're doing a short piece on a study that came out today that showed 1/3 of all teenagers text 100 messages a day. Do you find that hard to believe, Biz, or does that sound sort of appropriate given everything you know?
It doesn't sound too inappropriate. I mean, think about all the emails so many of us send every day, and texts are just so much easier and so much more immediate, and they're done on the device that you never leave your house without, your mobile phone. I mean, you get to the point now where if you leave your mobile phone at home, you turn around, you go back, and you get it. And so it's always there for you, and texting is just this very easy way to reach out and connect with someone. So I'm not really that surprised that they would text that much.
When you and Evan Williams, your co-founder, started Twitter, as I said, 4 years ago, what was the goal? What were you guys trying to create?
Well, actually, the goal was to just work on a project that, for us, we were very emotionally invested in. We had started another startup we were working at called Audio, which was a podcasting startup, and the idea was that anyone could record their voice via a web browser or a telephone, and we would then send that message out to iPods, because at the time the iPod was just coming out, and we thought this could be an interesting new medium for us to work within, having worked previously at Google and on Blogger and blogging. What happened was this audio format wasn't really captivating enough for us. So another friend of ours who was working with us, named Jack Dorsey, had this idea that was been rattling around in his head for quite some time, and he hadn't really yet met the right people to talk to about it. And what happened was Jack and I had become good friends, and so Evan said, "Why don't you guys just pair up and work on something that really inspires you?" And so we took 2 weeks to build the Twitter prototype in 2006, and to then just ask our friends, what do you think about this simple tool? And the overwhelming reaction from folks was, it's a lot of fun. And that was the beginning. At first, for us, it was just about a lot of fun. In fact, some early critics of Twitter said, Twitter is not useful. To which Evan, my co-founder, replied, well, neither is ice cream. Should we ban ice cream, ban all joy, and stop working on Twitter? No, of course not. We were having fun working on it, and that was the initial impetus behind the project. That and a hint that it could be an interesting and big tool for people to use, but that was how it would grow was definitely not on our radar at the time.
Well, before I get into that with you, does dear old Jack have a big piece of this pie, I hope?
Of course. Jack is actually the chairman of the board of directors. He's no longer sort of on active duty at Twitter because he went and started another revolutionary company. But
Called
we
what?
hear from him
Called
all
what?
the time.
What's his revolutionary company so I can buy
He
stock
started
in it?
His company is in the area of mobile payments, and it's called Square.
That sounds really boring, Biz. I got to be honest with you. Mobile payments?
It's very well. If you talk to Jack about it, I'm sure he'll get you very excited. He has a way of doing that.
Meanwhile, you say how, initially you thought, God, this is really fun. Did you all ever imagine, first of all, it would grow, it would become such a huge success and be utilized in so many different ways? And why do you think it has morphed into something that's a lot more than simply fun?
We didn't have any real expectation about what would happen with Twitter. Evan and I have been working on developing large-scale systems that allow people to express themselves and communicate for about a decade now, coming through blogging. And so we knew that there is inherent value and that the open exchange of information can really have a positive impact on the world. But we weren't, that's not where our heads were at the time. What happened with Twitter was a series of very eye-opening moments. I can tell you a story from 2006, a story from 2007, a story from 2008, and a story from 2009. Each one of these things, and many others, revealing to us the potential that this service had. And now in 2010, we're really beginning to realize that we're just at the beginning of what Twitter can become. So we didn't have an idea in the beginning, but as these stories unfolded and opened our eyes, we really began to realize what we had on our hands.
I'll bite. Can you give me one of those stories from the past 4 years that maybe in some ways represented a tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell might say, where you thought, geez, we're onto something here?
Each one was kind of a bigger tipping point, but the very first one was in Austin, Texas in March of 2007, when we had been working on Twitter for quite some time, but not very many people were using it. Maybe 100,000 people or less were tinkering with Twitter. But we went to a technology conference in Austin, Texas. Actually, it's a film and music conference, but the first part is an interactive portion, and that's where all the geeks and nerds go first. And we had a lot of those types of users early on Twitter. And when we went to this conference, this was the first time we were able to see Twitter being used in the wild by people on their mobile phones and on their laptops, etc. And one story that stood out from that visit was that there was a guy, and he was at a bar, and the bar was very loud and crowded. And so he sent out a tweet saying, this place is too crowded and loud. I want to be able to have conversations with my friends, so I'm moving to this other bar. And he tweeted out the location of the other bar. Now, in the 8 or 10 minutes it took him to walk to that other bar, hundreds and hundreds of people had descended upon the bar, and it was filled to capacity, and there was a line out the door. What had happened was his tweet went to his followers. They sent out a similar tweet, and so on. And all of these people swarmed this location. And for us, that conjured up this image of a flight of birds, a flock of birds moving around an object in flight. Looks so choreographed, looks so practiced, but in reality, it's just this rudimentary communication among individuals in real time that allow them to behave as one. And that's when we realized we had created a new kind of communication that enables people to move in this manner. And that was really eye-opening for us.
And very organic and, just sort of a natural thing. It's nothing that you could actually manipulate or, have some kind of game plan or business plan to enable that to happen.
Yeah. And then the other thing that started happening after that was we started to see people using it for good. We started seeing people doing this kind of organization for charitable causes, or helping one another during disasters like earthquakes or a fuel shortage that happened the next year in Atlanta, Georgia. You would imagine during a fuel shortage that people would, if they found out where fuel was, they would keep it to themselves, but they didn't. They instead were using Twitter and Twitter's real-time search capabilities to share exactly the locations of the gas stations that had fuel so that they could help their fellow Atlanteans find fuel. And when we saw things like this happening, we realized that not only we created a new form of communication, but our wildest dreams, our most optimistic dreams, that people are basically good and that they will do good things if you give them the right tools were being confirmed. And it became for us then just Twitter became this magical place to work. And it meant that we were contributing to some larger good just by showing up. And for us, that was truly inspiring.
I was going to say, that's a nice feeling to have. And I guess you might have answered this already, Biz, but ex-Limo Man has a tweet. And the question he's asking is, what is the most surprising way Twitter has or is being used that you never envisioned? Would you say it's sort of the philanthropic angle, or are there other ways that have surprised you?
Well, I wouldn't say that I was necessarily that surprised by the philanthropic angle, because I do feel that people are basically good and want to do good things, and when you give them the right tools to do them, that they will. I think one of the really surprising things that happened with Twitter was that very early on we decided to open our technology in a way that allowed other developers who didn't necessarily work for Twitter, other technical people, to go ahead and build on top of what we had built. And that's called an API, which just means we expose enough of our technology so that you can go ahead and build new ways of interacting with Twitter on it. We did that very, very early in the company's history. In fact, before we'd actually incorporated it as a company. And what happened was, today we have more than 100,000 different registered applications that people can use to interact with Twitter. The result being almost 75% of the traffic that we see happens outside of twitter.com, our website, and instead is taking place in what has become kind of an ecosystem. So in a way, Twitter has become much more, and it has become much bigger than just the website that we started and just the SMS service that we started.
Were you nervous about doing that? I mean, was there any part of you that wanted to be more proprietary?
Not so much. I mean, from the very beginning, we've been really open about things, and we really do believe, I mean, sort of our fundamental belief is that the open exchange of information can lead to positive global impact. And so that necessarily carries through to an approach, a company approach, that we need to be as open as possible. The more open a company we are, the more greater the chances are that we'll succeed, because so many people will be building on the platform. And so there have been times, like more recently, when we decided to provide all of the data that is coming into Twitter to partners like Google and Microsoft and Yahoo, very big players in this space. When we brought up the idea to some of our board members, they said, you know, that sounds a little risky. But when you think about it, and when you think about what's our goal is to serve the end user as best as we can. And if we provide this data to these great companies, who will then provide much better search and much better ways of discovering interesting content on Twitter, then the answer becomes very easy. Of course we should give the data away, because more people will get more value out of the service. You
know, we're so high-tech here, Biz, that I've got a live question on my BlackBerry. Aren't you impressed?
Cool. I'm very impressed.
I'm kidding. Okay, someone named John Usman, I hope I'm pronouncing John's last name correctly. Is there anything you don't want Twitter to become?
Well, one of the things that we're actively sort of working on now is our culture as a company. What we don't want to become is one of these sort of big companies that people say, it used to be cool to work there, but now I want to go work at another startup. So we've taken a lot of time and energy to try to develop a culture at Twitter that tries to mimic that very sort of improvisational and exciting entrepreneurial spirit. So the way we've approached that is there are several different groups that work at Twitter. For example, the group that works just on mobile and creating a great mobile experience for Twitter users is its own group. And that group has its own designers, its own operations people, its own engineers, its own support. And they function very much like their own startup within Twitter. In fact, just like Twitter has its board meetings with its board of directors to explain what we're planning in the quarter ahead, each of these groups, and there are several of them at Twitter, I mean, a dozen, they come to board meetings that Ev and I attend, and they say, look, here's our plan for the next quarter. This is what we're going to do, and you let us know if you don't like it or you love something. And in that way, these groups are very much in charge of their own destiny. And so that's working out pretty well for us right now, because we are afraid, you know, or we're careful anyways, to realize that as we grow very quickly as a company, we do run the risk of becoming one of those big companies. We're up to now about almost just under 200 people and at the office, and we just don't want to become one of those big nameless companies that people don't really want to work at anymore. We want people to love Twitter and love coming in every day and enjoying work.
And your management philosophy is really to give people a lot of responsibility, empower them, so that they won't feel stifled creatively, which I think is probably a great way to get a great product from people. Let me ask you about something Stephen Colbert said to you, which I thought was funny. He said, "I assume the biz in Biz Stone does not stand for business model." And I know you guys are trying to change that biz. You had this recent Chirp conference, and you announced plans to make some money for Twitter, which is basically having promoted tweets. I still don't quite, excuse my ignorance, understand the concept that well. Can you explain it to me?
Sure. A promoted tweet is just an organic tweet. It's a tweet that already exists in the system, but it's one that a company like a Starbucks or a Virgin Airlines would like more people to see than just the people that follow their current tweets. So what we're able to do is we're able to provide a platform for these companies to say, look, if somebody's looking for the term coffee on Twitter search, we would love it if the tweet we did yesterday about the new blend that we have shows up at the very top of all of the tweets and stays at the very top. And that's what a promoted tweet is. It just means it's going to get a lot more exposure to a lot more people. So it's just a tweet like any other tweet, except it's going to be seen by a lot more Twitter users.
So it's only for people who are searching for something? In other words, if I tweeted, "Oh, I love mint chip ice cream," could a company find that tweet and somehow then send me some kind of Haagen-Dazs or Baskin-Robbins ad?
Well, no, that's not how it works. The way that it works is just, it is based on search at first, and that's phase one. Later on, we're going to see how that works, and we're going to expand the program. But it has to be you actively looking, typing in the word ice cream, and then seeing a promoted tweet from Haagen-Dazs that's saying something interesting about ice cream, and that's the key. Is that we also have this way of measuring whether or not a tweet is of interest to people, especially a promoted tweet. We're calling it resonance, and that takes into consideration many different things, but the essential basics of it are this. If people are enjoying the tweet, the promoted tweet, then it will remain a promoted tweet. If people in general don't think that this tweet is very interesting, it will cease to become a promoted tweet, and the advertiser will not have to pay for it anymore. So this is good for users because they're only going to see tweets that are interesting, and it's good for advertisers because they don't have to pay for these kind of duds.
Right,
and,
but how do you know?
It's good overall for experience.
How do you know if a tweet is interesting, a promoted tweet? I mean, is it because it's retweeted, or how do you measure that?
That's part of it. We measure it through several different ways at first. And of course, we're just at the beginning, so we're going to see how this works. But retweet is one way that people can interact with a tweet. They can also click on a link in a tweet. They can also click on the avatar of the tweet. There's a lot of different ways that they can favorite the tweet. There's a lot of different ways that people can interact with a tweet, and this signals to us that the tweet has somehow captured their attention. And if a lot of people are interacting with the tweet in a variety of ways, that signals to us that that tweet is resonating with users and that the tweet is an interesting tweet in some capacity. Now, if no one's clicking on anything, people are basically ignoring this tweet, that signals to us that it's probably not a very interesting tweet, and we remove it from sponsored tweets so people don't have to look at it anymore.
So you think what if this whole thing is a bust, that none of the tweets are particularly interesting to any of the users? Will you just say, oh, well, we better come up with another way to make some money here?
Well, we know that there are tweets that are already extremely interesting to users. We see that's the thing here, is that this happens already. We're only building on something that's been happening already at Twitter. So just the beginning of the month, actually Starbucks sent out a tweet about an April Fool's joke that they were running, where they were advertising two new sizes of Starbucks coffee. One was called the Micra, and it was like this small, and one was called the Plenda, and it was this giant bucket. And they sent out a tweet saying, we're announcing our new sizes. And that wasn't a sponsored tweet or a promoted tweet. But it was just such a funny tweet that we saw an extremely big number of people clicking on it and doing all the things that I just said,
right.
so that it naturally became what we're calling a top tweet, and that's separate. But it points to the fact that there's earned media on tweets. There's sort of an earned success,
right?
And then there's which is very organic to the system, and then there's a promoted or paid kind of success for these tweets, and that's where promoted tweets are kind of the best of both worlds.
I was going to say comedy writers may have a whole new venue, right? And I think probably Starbucks was a little bit of a slap in the face to Dunkin' Donuts too, right? Because they had those ads kind of mocking all those sizes and their whole lingo.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
How often do you tweet?
I'd say I tweet sometimes as little as once a day, and sometimes like several times a day, and it depends on really how my day is going. I find that when I travel or when I'm doing something out of the ordinary, I tend to tweet a lot more than usual. And when I'm busy with work, I spend a lot of time reading tweets and checking tweets. And when I'm busy at work, I'll usually just tweet out like once or twice a day.
Do you have any plans? I know Evan has admitted that it's complicated for some people to use Twitter. Would you ever simplify the process in any way? Have you guys talked about that?
Yeah, we're working very hard on that now, actually. We've been floored by the growth of Twitter, because Evan and I both realize that there's a long way to go in terms of making the experience a lot better and a lot easier to understand. You know, people hear about Twitter everywhere, and then they go to Twitter, and they have a heck of a time figuring out what they're supposed to do with it. So we've created a special team called the onboarding team, whose job it is specifically to research and build new and better ways for people to get more engaged with Twitter once they hear about it and once they sign on. And they're making some good progress, but it's definitely been an area historically where we've needed improvement.
A lot of people ask this question, and I'd like to know too. Can you explain the hashtag and how we can use it better to optimize our experience on Twitter?
Yeah, the hashtag is one of these things, kind of like the retweet, which was born of users inventing new ways of using Twitter. The same was true with the @replies. That wasn't something we introduced. That was something we recognized as an emergent pattern and then turned it into a feature. Same with retweet. And now with hashtags, what people are doing is they're often writing about something, and then they're adding a hashtag to indicate you know, they're using the pound sign and then a word. They're using that to indicate that that tweet is related to that event or to that you know, TV show we're all watching right now or whatever it is. And by using the hashtag and including in the tweet, that allows other people to use Twitter real-time search to see all of the tweets that have that hashtag in them. And in effect, it provides an easy way to collect all of the tweets around a certain event or TV show or something like that.
Let me ask you about paid content. You know, there are some advocates like Barry Diller, as you know, Rupert Murdoch, who say, you know, we should start charging for content, because after all, at some point, you know, Twitter and all these other internet businesses have got to make some money so they can pay their employees, right? What do you think of the whole notion of paid content? Or do you think everything, you know, sort of the genie's out of the bottle and we're at the point of no return when it comes to that?
Well, I think for Twitter, it's an entirely different situation.
Right.
I think things like you know, promoted tweets are going to be a sustainable business model for us. You know, it's interesting. I mean, I think there's a story there where people talk about where people say, look, folks are going to have to pay for reading these articles. They're just going to have to. I think the second half of that that's not said is, because if they don't, we're going to have to come up with a whole new plan.
Right.
And we don't know what that plan is. And I think that
so you're
sort
saying
of
they're being lazy? They're being lazy by saying that?
I just think that, I mean, I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm someone who just gets very excited about new opportunities. So I think that along with whatever plans folks have to try to make a paid-for system on this stuff, they should also be thinking, okay, what's a crazy, new, innovative way that we could approach this in an entirely different way? I'm not saying I have the answers to that, but I think it's very exciting, and I think there should be some folks, and probably are, spending time thinking of new and different ways they could approach this where it might even be more successful than the old way.
Okay, I've got a bunch more tweets, but real quickly, would you ever charge people for a premium service on Twitter, you know, like special options and features?
Well, we do have a plan for creating commercial accounts, and that's not necessarily what we'll call it in the future. But this idea that you, especially organizations and companies, really want to know, how are my tweets doing? Am I effectively using the product to reach my constituents if I'm a politician, or you know, sell more shoes if I'm an online retailer, or just am I getting the word out about my nonprofit, or et cetera, you know.
Or am I getting more viewers for the CBS Evening News?
Right, exactly. And so what we want to do is we want to create these commercial accounts, which would essentially provide a few different things. And this is in testing right now with a few hundred different organizations and companies. Some of the features there would be an analytics dashboard, something that really tells you a lot about, okay, you know,
here's who you're trying to reach, and this is what they're responding to. And
how many people are clicking on the link that I sent out in the last tweet? How many people are retweeting it or starring it, or this kind of thing? The dashboard that basically gives you visibility into the success of using Twitter. Another feature that we've included in that is the ability to have multiple authors on one Twitter account. So if you're a company like Starbucks, but you want 12 people updating the feed, you can allow that, and then you'll see at the bottom which employee wrote the tweet. So things like that are coming, and it actually feathers in very nicely with the promoted tweets platform, because obviously if you're going to pay for promoted tweets, you're going to want to know how they're doing, so that you can either spend more money or spend less money accordingly.
Absolutely. Okay. What about this Library of Congress development deal? They're going to archive every tweet. Biz, I just like saying Biz, so I like to say your name a lot. Biz, how is that possible? 15 million tweets a day. So how can they possibly do that?
Yeah, billions of tweets over the years.
And can I ask you another question? Why?
Well, it was very exciting for us. I mean, you know, the Library of Congress is the oldest federal institution in the United States. It's been around since 1800.
No, I love the Library of Congress. I don't know why they'd want all these tweets.
It's the largest library in the world. They have every piece of music ever registered. They have every pamphlet, every book. They have all these things. And when they decided that tweets are important enough to be preserved for history, because they basically represent, you know, what everyone is thinking and what everyone is feeling at the time. And when they signaled to us that they thought tweets were important enough to be included in the Library of Congress, we were very excited by that. So, and we'd already, as I said before, created a method for sharing all of our data, public data that is. Of course, this doesn't include any private accounts or public, protected accounts. But we've already figured out a way to give this data to folks like Google, Yahoo, Microsoft. So when the Library of Congress approached us, in keeping with our spirit of being very open, we said, that's great, let's do it. Let's see how this goes.
So it's kind of a social history, but it just seems that the sheer numbers, Biz, seem pretty daunting. You know, that I wouldn't want that job.
I don't know if they have to do them one by one, Katie. I think they can. I think they can. We'll give them a bulk rate there for those
All right,
things.
You'll give them a big Twitter dump. Okay,
yes.
let me ask you this tweet. Jay Burgos, 314 asks, what was the very first tweet? Do you guys know that?
Yes, we do. We know what the very first tweet was, and it's not going to be very exciting because the very first tweet, at first when we had the system set up, we auto-tweeted the first tweet for you, and that was just setting up my Twitter. So the first tweet was from my friend Jack, and probably followed closely by the second tweet by me, which is exactly the same. But it was as simple as just setting up my Twitter.
Wow. Okay. And stop.
I'm sorry it wasn't more exciting.
That was really, yeah, that was kind of a letdown a little bit, Biz.
This is going to be big.
Argawa 1. Sapna Argawa 1, and I hope there's not a 2 because I can't pronounce that name, says, what are your plans for India? How many users do you have there? And I guess the second question for me is, how important is the international community, and are you expanding your tech markets into places like India and China?
Yeah, we are. We're growing. We're actually growing internationally now faster than we are growing in the United States. I think it's about 60% more, all over the world. You know, from India to Indonesia, from South America to Japan, we're growing in every country around the world. A lot of that growth is through specific partnerships with mobile operators and carriers around the world to provide Twitter through text messaging. In many places of the world, they don't actually have internet access, but they do have text messaging, and you can do everything over Twitter, over SMS that you could on the web. So that's a very exciting way for us to grow, especially in places like India. We're also translating the service. We're available in French, Italian, German, Spanish, Japanese, and English now, but we want to become available in many more languages around the world so that it's easier for people to use Twitter. So international is a big part of our growth strategy going forward, and it's a big part of our goal to really open things up and get more people sharing more information more widely.
Sounds like that's your philosophy. Can we do a quick thing? We're going to play the name game real quick. I'm just going to mention some names, and you just give me a quick response. You don't have to go on and on unless you, of course, want to. All right, Steve Jobs.
Okay. Steve Jobs, yes. What about him? Wonderful leader.
That's what you would say about him?
Yes.
Ariana Huffington.
Warm and kind, actually, in my experience.
Justin Bieber.
Breakout success out of nowhere.
One of your favorites, I heard. Mark Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg is a very thoughtful and smart young man.
Why did you turn down Facebook's offer to buy Twitter for $500 million?
Well, we actually, you know, Twitter obviously is has been growing very successfully, and it still is. But just becoming very popular and proving that Twitter can be a reliable and interesting and useful tool around the world, that's only kind of half the job. The other half of the job is, can we build a business on this popularity? Can we create a sustainable company, a company of enduring value? And that's something that once we realized what we had on our hands, and once we realized the potential of Twitter, we very much wanted to do that second part and prove that this could be a company of enduring value. So for us, although we're big fans of Facebook and all of their work, it just wasn't good timing for us. It wasn't something that was appealing to us because we really wanted to build the company out ourselves. Yeah,
you didn't want to relinquish the reins just yet. Is it true you've read every Sherlock Holmes book ever written?
Where'd you hear that? Yeah,
hey, I did my research.
You did your research. You called my mom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was a huge Sherlock Holmes fan when I was a little kid, so I read all the stories.
Did you like the movie?
I actually loved the movie. I thought it was really good. And when I saw the preview, I was like, Sherlock Holmes knows Kung Fu now? When did this happen? But I think the way they did it was very entertaining, and I think they captured the spirit of it pretty well. What
was the last song you downloaded?
The last song I downloaded was probably something from Ludovico Einaudi, who's actually an Italian classical composer who does piano music. And he's known for scoring a lot of films, and I recently discovered him, and I find his music very kind of at once calming, but at the same time invigorating, if that's possible. So it was probably his latest album.
All right, I'm going to have to check him out. And do you say tweeted or Twitter? Julie Hall Boston asked us to ask you that question. It's tweeted, right?
Well, for years I was saying the word is Twitter. You can look it up in the dictionary. The verb is twittering. It's what birds do in the trees. But what happened was people just really fell in love with tweeting, and I tweeted that. Did you see my tweet? And so I think I'm going to now have to relinquish style control here to the people who have spoken and go ahead and say it's tweeted.
And finally, I'm going to ask you a selfish question, Biz. You know, I would consider myself a neophyte tweeter, and I try to do it, and I've done it a fair amount, but I've never completely comfortable, and I can tell you it's not a good idea to tweet after a few glasses of wine. You want to try to avoid that if you can.
I'd agree.
But
I would agree with that.
what guidance can you give me in terms of how I can use Twitter effectively?
Yeah, I think it varies.
That holds true for a lot of people. I don't want to be completely
right. Yeah. I mean, there are some basics there are basics there. I think engaging with people who follow your tweets and occasionally replying them goes a long way.
I do that. Sometimes I don't reply nice things though. Sometimes when people are really rude, I say something back to them and then try to be nice, but I kind of respond in a way that, you know, calls them out a bit. Is that bad?
I don't think so. I mean, I think obviously to a point that's fine. I also think sharing links and pointing people to interesting content again sort of builds a reputation for you. Like, oh, Katie sends us to some cool places. And then in your case, I think specifically letting them in a little bit into what you're doing, because not everyone lives such an exciting life, I think is probably a good way to go. But I find also just sending out links to interesting things. Like the other day when I sent out a link to a cat using an iPad, that got a big reaction.
Okay, good to know. I think you're right. I don't usually send out links, and I need to become more technically proficient, but that's good advice. And sometimes, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to be like, oh, I'm interviewing Al Pacino today, or I just talked to Al Pacino. He was kind of wacky, you know, because I also don't want to come across as bragging either. Like, oh, aren't I cool?
And you don't want Al Pacino thinking you're calling him wacky, because you don't know what's going to happen after that.
No, it's okay. I think he would call himself wacky. Well, Biz Stone, it's really fun to talk to you. I don't think we have any more. Wait a second. Oh, I just want to do this since I can.
One more thing.
Yeah. Hibiscus asks, is it true characters are reducing from 140 to 90?
No, that's not true. We love 140 and we're sticking with it.
And one more, Laloric asked, does Twitter plan to buy up a lot of these third-party apps or put them out of business by doing the apps in-house?
We've acquired we've made a few acquisitions over the years that have turned out to be wildly successful, and the teams have integrated very well into Twitter. I think going forward, what we want to do is we want to be as easy to use and as sort of ubiquitous and mainstream as possible, and we're getting there. We're getting to that point. There are some companies that I think we'll still look at in the Twitter ecosystem to say, is this something that we think would be really great and serve users well if it was part of Twitter? And our end goal really is, how do we serve our users best? But we don't have any plans to sort of go around snapping everybody up, for sure.
Well, Biz Stone, congratulations on all your success. You seem like a really nice person, so I'm happy that Twitter's doing so well and you're using it in such a useful way. And thanks for talking with us this afternoon. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun for me and very educational, too.
It was fun for me, too. Thank you, Katie, for having me.
Thanks so much, Biz. And by the way, you can follow me on Twitter. It's twitter.com/Katie Couric. I'll try to make them more interesting and take Biz's advice. And if you missed any part of this live show today, you can see this episode, and in fact, all the episodes of the web show anytime at cbsnews.com. Thank you for watching and tweeting your great questions. And now stay tuned for a message from our sponsor, doesnt.